I discovered the invoice in my mailbox on a Tuesday afternoon, wedged between a pizza coupon and my electric bill, and for a solid minute I just stared at it, because surely this had to be some kind of mistake. The letterhead read, Sunshine Sprouts Daycare LLC, and the amount due was $1,783 for commercial liability insurance coverage on my property at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane in Scottsdale, Arizona. The problem was, I'd never heard of Sunshine Sprouts Daycare, and I definitely did not run a daycare on my property. My name is Keith Rodriguez, and I had been living in the Silverstone Heights subdivision for about 3 years at that point. It was one of those planned communities with identical stucco houses, desert landscaping to comply with water restrictions, and an HOA that thought it ran a small dictatorship. The house was a modest 3-bedroom with a decent-sized backyard that backed up to common area land, which was technically owned by the HOA, but undeveloped, just natural desert with some saguaro cacti and creosote bushes. I worked as a software engineer for a tech company downtown, spent most of my time indoors, and generally kept to myself. I flipped the invoice over, looking for some explanation. There was a handwritten note on the back. Keith, please remit payment within 30 days. As discussed at the March HOA meeting, all property owners utilizing common areas for commercial purposes must carry appropriate insurance. Thank you for your cooperation. Brenda Whitmore, HOA President. I had not attended the March HOA meeting. I had not attended any HOA meeting in probably 2 years because they were mind-numbing affairs where people argued about mailbox colors and whether desert willows were acceptable landscaping choices. More importantly, I was not utilizing any common area for any commercial purpose whatsoever. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the invoice. A cheerful woman answered on the third ring. Sunshine Sprouts Daycare, this is Melissa speaking. Hi, yeah, I received an invoice from your business and I think there has been a mistake, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. I'm Keith Rodriguez at 4782 Meadowbrook Lane. Oh, Mr. Rodriguez, yes, we have been trying to reach you. Your insurance payment is overdue. We really need to get that settled so we can maintain compliance with state licensing requirements. My jaw tightened. I think you have me confused with someone else. I do not run a daycare. I do not have anything to do with any daycare. There was a pause. Sir, Sunshine Sprouts Daycare operates on your property. We have been there since February. The outdoor play area extends onto your parcel, according to the property survey Mrs. Whitmore provided us. My blood pressure started climbing. Who is Mrs. Whitmore? She is the owner of Sunshine Sprouts. Well, she and her husband own it. But she runs the day-to-day operations. This is the business phone number. Would you like her cell? Yes, I said through gritted teeth. I would very much like her cell number. She rattled off the digits and I scribbled them on the back of the invoice. I hung up and immediately dialed the new number. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. You have reached Patricia Whitmore. Please leave a detailed message and I will return your call as soon as possible. Patricia Whitmore. The name clicked into place. She was married to Gerald Whitmore, the HOA president. I had seen her at a few community events, a woman in her late 40s with that specific haircut that seemed to be required for HOA board members, perfectly highlighted blonde hair cut in a severe bob. She always wore athleisure outfits and had an aggressive fake tan. I did not leave a message. Instead, I walked out my back door and into my yard. It was late April, and the Arizona heat was already building, even though it was only 5 in the afternoon. I stood at the back fence line and looked out at the common area behind my property. From my back patio, I could not see much because of the 6-foot block wall that surrounded my yard, but if I stood on the built-in bench near my grill, I could peer over. What I saw made my stomach drop. About 30 feet into the common area, clearly visible now that I was looking for it, was a wooden play structure. Swings, a slide, one of those climbing walls with colorful handholds. There was a shade canopy stretched over part of it. A chain-link fence enclosed the entire play area, maybe 40 feet by 40 feet. And the fence posts, I could see now, were positioned so that about a quarter of the fenced area actually extended onto what I was pretty sure was my property line. I got down from the bench and went back inside, my mind racing. I dug through my filing cabinet until I found the property survey I had gotten when I bought the house. I spread it out on my kitchen table and traced the boundary lines with my finger. The back of my lot extended 15 feet past my block wall into the common area, a weird quirk of how the development had been platted. Most people would not even realize they technically owned that strip of desert, but it was clearly marked on the survey. That play structure was definitely on my land. I grabbed my phone and took photos of the survey, then went back outside and took photos of the play structure from every angle I could manage. Then I called a lawyer. The lawyer I reached was a guy named David Chen who had helped me with my home purchase. He listened to my explanation, asked me to email him the photos and the invoice, and told me he would get back to me within a day or two. In the meantime, he said, do not pay that invoice, do not sign anything, and document everything. I spent that evening doing research. I found the Sunshine Sprouts Daycare website, which featured cheerful photos of children playing, eating snacks, and doing arts and crafts. The About Us page explained that Patricia Whitmore had 15 years of experience in early childhood education and had opened Sunshine Sprouts to provide a nature-based learning environment where children can thrive. The address listed was 4790 Meadowbrook Lane. That was the house directly behind mine. The Whitmores lived directly behind me, their backyard also bordering the common area. I rarely saw them because our houses faced different streets, but I knew Gerald Whitmore well enough to nod at during the occasional community function. He was a retired accountant, maybe 55, always wore polo shirts tucked into khakis, and took his role as HOA president extremely seriously. I pulled up the Arizona Department of Health Services website and searched for licensed childcare facilities. Sure enough, Sunshine Sprouts Daycare was listed, licensed for up to 12 children, with an address of 4790 Meadowbrook Lane. The license had been issued in January of this year. So this was a legitimate business, at least in terms of state licensing. But that did not give them the right to use my property, and it definitely did not give them the right to bill me for insurance. I barely slept that night, my mind churning through scenarios. In the morning, I called my office and told them I needed to work from home. Then I positioned myself at my back window with my laptop and watched. Around 8:30, I heard children's voices. I went to the back door and stepped outside, listening. High-pitched laughter, the sound of running feet, the creak of swings. I got back on my bench and looked over the wall. There were at least 8 kids on that play structure, ranging in age from maybe 3 to 6 years old. Patricia Whitmore was there with another woman, both watching the children play. I took more photos, making sure the timestamp was visible. At 9:15, my phone rang. It was David Chen. Keith, I have reviewed everything you sent me. You have a very clear case here. That daycare is operating on your property without your permission, which is trespassing. The fact that they are billing you for insurance related to their commercial operation is outrageous. I recommend we start with a cease and desist letter, which I can draft today and send via certified mail. We should also send a copy to the HOA. What if they do not stop? Then we file for an injunction and potentially sue for damages. But let's start with the letter. Most people back down when they realize they do not have a legal leg to stand on. I authorized him to send the letter and felt slightly better. This would be resolved soon. It was clearly just a misunderstanding or maybe some kind of power play by the Whitmores that would collapse as soon as actual legal pressure was applied. I was wrong. 3 days later, I received a response. Not from Patricia Whitmore, but from the HOA attorney. The letter explained that the HOA had granted Sunshine Sprouts Daycare a license to use the common area for recreational purposes as part of a community enrichment initiative. The letter further stated that my property line, as recorded in the HOA's master development plan, did not extend beyond my block wall, and therefore I had no claim to the land where the play structure was located. I called David immediately. "They are lying," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "I have the survey. I own that land." "Send me everything you have related to your property purchase," David said. "Title report, deed, any HOA documents you received at closing. We need to establish the chain of title definitively." I spent the afternoon gathering documents and emailing them to David. That evening, I decided to try the direct approach. I walked around the block to 4790 Meadowbrook Lane and rang the doorbell. Patricia Whitmore answered, and her expression when she saw me was not friendly. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said coldly. "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to talk about your daycare. If this is about the insurance invoice, you need to take that up with your lawyer. Our lawyer has already responded to the ridiculous cease and desist letter." "You are operating a business on my property without my permission," I said, forcing myself to stay calm. "That is trespassing. I'm asking you nicely to move your play structure." She crossed her arms. "That play structure is on HOA common area land. We have every right to be there. The HOA board voted unanimously to allow Sunshine Sprouts to use that space. The HOA does not own that land. I do. I have the property survey to prove it." Her eyes narrowed. "Your survey is outdated. When the development was completed in 2019, there was a boundary adjustment that corrected several plotting errors. Your lot line is at your back wall, not beyond it. Show me the documentation of that boundary adjustment." "I do not have to show you anything. Our attorney will handle this." She started to close the door. "You are billing me for insurance on a business I did not consent to," I said, my voice rising. "That is fraud. You are being billed because your negligence in maintaining your portion of the common area has created liability exposure for our business. If you had been attending HOA meetings, you would know that all homeowners are responsible for maintaining the common areas adjacent to their property. Since you have failed to do so, and since we are now using that space, you are required to carry insurance. It is all in the HOA bylaws." She shut the door firmly in my face. I stood there on her porch, breathing hard, my hands clenched into fists. This was insane. This was absolutely insane. I walked back home and immediately pulled out my HOA bylaws, the thick document I'd been given at closing and never fully read. I spent 2 hours going through it page by page. There was nothing about property owners being required to maintain common areas. There was nothing about being billed for insurance for commercial operations. There was a section about the HOA's right to assess fees for maintenance, but it was specific to actual common area amenities like the community pool and the entrance landscaping. The next morning, David called me with news. "Nasi, I have reviewed all your documents and confirmed the property boundaries with the county recorder's office. Your survey is accurate, and there has been no boundary adjustment. You own 15 feet beyond your back wall. The HOA's claim is completely false." "So what do? We file a lawsuit. We sue Patricia Whitmore, Gerald Whitmore, and the HOA for trespass, and we seek an immediate injunction to remove the play structure from your property. We will also seek damages for the unauthorized use of your land." "How long will this take?" "We can file within a week. The injunction hearing will probably be scheduled within 30 days. This is a pretty clear-cut case, Keith. I am confident we will win." I authorized him to proceed and tried to focus on my work, but it was hard to concentrate when I could hear children playing on my property every weekday morning. The noise was constant between 8 and noon, then again from 2 to 5 in the afternoon. Screaming, crying, laughing, the sound of toys clattering against plastic equipment. A week later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one informed me that I was being fined $500 for failure to maintain property in accordance with community standards. The specific violation was that the desert area behind my wall was overgrown with weeds and presenting a fire hazard. I laughed out loud when I read it. It was desert, natural desert, the same desert that covered the entire common area. There were no weeds, just native plants. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I forwarded the letter to David, who added it to our lawsuit. We filed in Maricopa County Superior Court on May 15th, asking for an injunction, damages, and a declaration that the HOA's fine was invalid. The Whitmores and the HOA were served with the lawsuit on May 18th. On May 19th, I came home from a grocery run to find my car blocked in my driveway by a white SUV. Patricia Whitmore was standing next to it, her arms crossed, her face twisted in fury. "You are trying to destroy my business," she spat at me as I got out of my car. "Get off my property," I said. Do you have any idea how much money I have invested in Sunshine Sprouts? How many families depend on me for childcare, and you are going to shut me down because of some petty property dispute? It is not petty. You are using my land without permission. Move your play structure to your own property or to actual common area land, and we will not have a problem. There is no room on our property, and the HOA approved that location specifically. Gerald made sure of it. That was an interesting admission. Your husband approved the location of your business as HOA president? That's a conflict of interest. She stepped closer to me, invading my space. You are a pathetic little man who has nothing better to do than harass a small business owner. I have 12 children enrolled in my daycare, 12 families who will have to scramble to find new childcare if you force me to close. How does that make you feel? I am not forcing you to close. I am forcing you to stop trespassing on my property. Those are two different things. The court is going to side with us, she said. We have documentation. We have the HOA's approval. We have been operating for months without any complaint from you. You are going to lose, and you are going to pay our attorney fees. We will see about that. Now move your car before I call the police. She glared at me for another long moment, then got in her SUV and backed out of my driveway with an aggressive squeal of tires. I went inside and called David to report the confrontation. He told me to call the police and file a report if she came back, and to install security cameras if I had not already. I spent that weekend installing a video doorbell and 2 security cameras covering my front and back yards. I was glad I did, because on Monday morning I found dog feces smeared on my front door handle. The security footage showed a figure in dark clothing and a baseball cap approaching my door around 3 in the morning and doing the deed. I could not see their face clearly, but the build looked like it could be Gerald Whitmore. I filed a police report, though the officer who took my statement did not seem optimistic about catching the culprit. A lot of vandalism in these HOA neighborhoods, he said with a shrug. People get into disputes, things escalate. Best thing you can do is keep your cameras running and try to avoid confrontation. The injunction hearing was scheduled for June 10th. In the meantime, the harassment continued. I received another HOA fine, this time for parking my car on the street overnight, which was supposedly prohibited. Except I had not parked on the street. The photo they included with the fine notice showed a car that was not even the same color as mine. I received a third invoice from Sunshine Sprouts Daycare, this time for $2,000, with a note that interest was accruing on my unpaid balance. I also started receiving complaints from neighbors. 3 different people stopped me at various times to tell me that Patricia Whitmore had been going door to door claiming I was trying to shut down the neighborhood daycare and ruin things for working families. I heard you were suing the HOA, my next-door neighbor, an older woman named Janet, said to me over the fence one evening. Is that true? I'm suing because the Whitmores built a commercial play structure on my property without asking me, I explained. I have nothing against daycares. I just do not want one operating on land I own. She frowned. Patricia said you were just being difficult. She said that land belongs to the HOA. It does not. I have the survey to prove it. Well, I hope you get it sorted out, she said, but her tone was dubious. The court of public opinion was turning against me. I could feel it. The Whitmores were spinning this as a David versus Goliath story, with themselves as the scrappy small business owners, and me as the heartless corporation. The irony was thick. June 10th finally arrived. I put on a suit and met David at the courthouse. We were sent to a large courtroom on the 3rd floor where several other cases were also being heard. The Whitmores were there with their attorney, a sharp-looking woman in her 30s named Rebecca Holt. Gerald looked smug. Patricia looked like she wanted to set me on fire with her mind. Our case was called around 10:30. We all stood before the judge, a gray-haired man named Judge Thomas Brennan, who looked like he had heard every kind of property dispute imaginable and was tired of all of them. David presented our case clearly and efficiently. He showed the judge my property survey, the county records confirming the boundaries, and photos of the play structure clearly encroaching on my land. He explained that the Whitmores had built their commercial operation without my permission and were now attempting to bill me for insurance related to their business. Rebecca Holt argued that the HOA had the authority to grant licenses for the use of common areas, that the master development plan superseded individual property surveys, and that I had suffered no damages because I was not using the land in question. Judge Brennan listened to both sides, reviewed the documents, and asked several pointed questions about the HOA's authority and the boundary adjustment Patricia had claimed existed. "Is there any recorded documentation of a boundary adjustment?" he asked Rebecca Holt. She hesitated. "Your Honor, the HOA's records indicate that a correction was made to the plat map, but we have not yet located the recorded version." "So there is no recorded boundary adjustment," the judge said flatly. "We believe one exists, Your Honor. We need more time to locate it." Judge Brennan looked at David. "Do the county records show any boundary adjustment for this property?" "No, Your Honor. I checked personally. The boundaries are exactly as shown on Mr. Rodriguez's survey." The judge nodded slowly. "Here is what I am going to do. I am granting a preliminary injunction. The play structure must be removed from Mr. Rodriguez's property within 30 days. Mrs. Whitmore, if you want to continue operating your daycare, you need to find a location that you actually have the legal right to use. This court will not allow commercial operations on private property without the owner's consent, regardless of HOA approval." Patricia made a strangled noise. Rebecca Holt said, "Your Honor, we request a stay of the injunction pending appeal." "Denied. 30 days. Next case." We walked out of the courtroom and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. David clapped me on the shoulder. "Good result. They have 30 days to remove the structure. After that, we can get a court order allowing you to remove it yourself, and they will have to pay for it." "What about the damages?" "That will be addressed in the full trial, which will be scheduled in a few months. But this is the important part. They have to stop trespassing." I drove home feeling victorious. That feeling lasted until I pulled into my driveway and saw the sign. It was a large hand-painted sign stuck in my front yard, right by the sidewalk. It read, "This homeowner is trying to shut down our daycare. Children matter more than property lines." I yanked the sign out of the ground and threw it in my trash can. Then I checked my security cameras and saw that Patricia Whitmore had planted it there about an hour earlier. That evening, I started getting text messages from numbers I did not recognize. "You should be ashamed of yourself. What kind of person sues a daycare? I hope you do not have kids because you obviously hate children." Someone had posted my phone number online, probably on a neighborhood Facebook group or next door. I blocked the numbers as they came in, but they kept coming. The next morning, I found eggs splattered across my front windows, more dog feces on my driveway, a profane message spray painted on my trash cans. I called the police again. Same officer as before, equally unhelpful. Like I said, HOA disputes get ugly. Not much we can do unless you have clear evidence of who is doing this. "I have video of Patricia Whitmore on my property planting that sign," I said. "Planting a sign is not a crime. The vandalism is, but your cameras did not catch that, right?" "No, it happened in the middle of the night." "Then we cannot do much. Keep documenting everything." I called David and told him what was happening. He suggested I file for a restraining order against the Whitmores. We put together the documentation showing the harassment, the confrontations, the vandalism, and filed the request. Meanwhile, the 30-day deadline was approaching, and the play structure had not been moved. I could still hear children playing every day. I walked around the block one afternoon to look, and the structure was still there, completely intact. On day 31, I called David. "They have not moved it." "Then we file a motion for contempt and request that the court authorize you to remove it at their expense." We filed the motion the next day. The hearing was scheduled for July 15th. In the meantime, the restraining order hearing was set for July 8th. The restraining order hearing was a disaster. Rebecca Holt brought in 3 parents from the daycare who testified that I had been driving slowly past the daycare, taking photos of the children and acting in a menacing manner. This was complete fiction. I had taken photos of the play structure from my own yard, and I had driven past the Whitmore house exactly once the day I went to confront Patricia. But the parents sounded sincere and concerned, and Judge Martinez, who was hearing the restraining order case, looked at me like I might be a predator. David pushed back hard, presenting the timeline of harassment I had suffered, the vandalism, Patricia's confrontation in my driveway. But the judge seemed more concerned about the children. "Mr. Rodriguez, have you been taking photos of the children at the daycare?" she asked. No, Your Honor. I have taken photos of the play structure from my own property to document the trespass. Any children in those photos are incidental. But there are photos of children. Yes, because they are playing on the structure that is on my property without my permission. I am documenting the ongoing violation of the court's injunction. She did not look convinced. In the end, she denied my request for a restraining order against the Whitmores and issued a mutual order of protection, meaning both sides were supposed to stay away from each other. She also ordered me to stop taking photos of the daycare. Your Honor, how am I supposed to document that they are violating the injunction if I cannot take photos? David asked. You can document the presence of the structure without photographing children, Judge Martinez said. We left that hearing, and I felt sick. Somehow I had become the bad guy in this situation. The Whitmores were violating a court order, trespassing on my property, and running a harassment campaign against me. But I was the one being told to stop taking photos. The contempt hearing on July 15th went better. Judge Brennan was not pleased that his injunction had been ignored. Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Whitmore, you were ordered to remove the play structure from Mr. Rodriguez's property within 30 days. It has now been 45 days, and the structure is still there. Why? Rebecca Holt stood. Your Honor, my clients have been working diligently to find an alternative location for the play structure, but it is a complex process. They need to get permits. They need to ensure the new location meets state licensing requirements. They request additional time. They had 30 days, Judge Brennan said. The order was clear. Mr. Rodriguez, what are you seeking? David stood. Your Honor, we request that the court authorize Mr. Rodriguez to remove the structure himself and that the defendants be ordered to pay all costs associated with the removal. We also request that the court fine the defendants for contempt. Judge Brennan nodded. Granted, Mr. and Mrs. Whitmore, you are in contempt of this court's order. I am fining you $5,000. Mr. Rodriguez is authorized to remove the play structure from his property by whatever means necessary, and you will reimburse him for all costs. You have 7 days to remove the structure yourselves. After that, Mr. Rodriguez may proceed with removal. Do you understand? Gerald Whitmore stood up, his face red. Your Honor, this is outrageous. That play structure cost $15,000 to build. If he removes it, it will be destroyed. Then I suggest you remove it carefully within the next 7 days, Judge Brennan said. This hearing is concluded. As we left the courtroom, Gerald Whitmore got in my face in the hallway. You are destroying our business, he hissed. We will fight you on every single thing. The HOA will make your life hell. A bailiff intervened and separated us. David pulled me away, and we left the courthouse quickly. That was a threat, I said once we were outside. It was, and it was stupid of him to make it in a courthouse hallway. If they continue harassing you, we will add it to the lawsuit. 7 days passed. The play structure remained. On day 8, I hired a company that specialized in demolition and hauling. They arrived at 7 in the morning with a truck and 4 workers. I gave them the court order and pointed them to the structure. It took them 3 hours to dismantle everything and haul it away. I recorded the entire process on my phone. Halfway through, Patricia Whitmore showed up and started screaming at the workers, telling them they were destroying her business, that she would sue them, that they were criminals. The lead worker calmly showed her the court order and continued working. She called the police. 2 officers arrived and I showed them the court order. They told Patricia there was nothing they could do. She stood there crying and yelling as the workers finished the job. The whole thing cost me $3,000. I sent the invoice to Rebecca Holt's office that afternoon. The full trial was scheduled for October 3rd. In the meantime, summer turned into fall, and the harassment escalated in creative ways. The HOA started sending me violation notices on a weekly basis. My house number was crooked. My garage door had a stain. My mailbox was faded. Each notice came with a $50 fine. I documented all of them and sent them to David, who added them to our growing case. Someone filed a complaint with the county claiming I was running an illegal business from my home. A code enforcement officer showed up and inspected my property, found nothing, and left. But it was another hassle, another hour of my life wasted dealing with the Whitmores' retaliation. I found nails scattered in my driveway twice, resulting in 2 flat tires. My trash cans were knocked over every week. Someone signed me up for dozens of spam mailing lists, and I started getting mountains of junk mail. In September, the HOA held a special meeting to vote on a special assessment. Every homeowner in the neighborhood would be charged $2,000 to cover legal expenses related to defending the community against frivolous litigation. I attended that meeting, my first HOA meeting in years. The community center was packed. Gerald Whitmore stood at the front, presiding over the meeting with a smug expression. When it came time to discuss the special assessment, he launched into a speech about how the HOA had to spend money defending itself against unreasonable legal action from a homeowner who refused to work within the system. I stood up. I have a question. Gerald's eyes narrowed. The floor is not open for questions yet. Actually, according to the bylaws, homeowners can speak during any discussion of financial matters. I'm speaking now. I looked around the room at my neighbors. The lawsuit Gerald is talking about is because his wife built a commercial daycare on my property without asking me. The court agreed with me and issued an injunction. The HOA is spending your money to defend the Whitmores' illegal use of my land. Is that really how you want your money spent? Murmurs rippled through the room. A man in the back stood up. Is that true? The daycare was on his property? The property boundaries are in dispute, Gerald said quickly. No, they are not, I said loudly. The court reviewed the survey and the county records and confirmed that the daycare was on my land. The Whitmores lost. Now Gerald wants you all to pay for his wife's mistake. A woman near the front raised her hand. Gerald, if the court already ruled, why are we still paying legal fees? The lawsuit is ongoing, Rebecca Holt said smoothly. She was sitting at a table near the front, apparently present as the HOA's attorney. There are multiple claims being litigated. Because I am also suing for damages from the unauthorized use of my property and for the harassment I have received from the HOA in retaliation, I added. Every bogus fine, every violation notice for things that are not violations, it is all retaliation. The room erupted in conversation. Gerald banged a gavel, trying to restore order. This is not the time or place for this discussion. We are voting on the special assessment. I move to table the vote until we can review the details of the lawsuit and the HOA's legal expenses, someone called out. Second, another voice said. Gerald looked furious, but he had to follow procedure. The motion to table passed by a wide margin. The special assessment was dead, at least for now. As I left the meeting, several neighbors approached me to say they had not known the full story, that Patricia had told everyone I was just being difficult. A few apologized for the hostile texts and messages. I appreciated that, but the damage had been done. I felt like a pariah in my own neighborhood. October 3rd finally arrived. The trial was expected to last 2 days. David had prepared thoroughly, with exhibits, photos, surveys, financial records, and a timeline of every harassment incident. The first day focused on the trespass claim. David presented the evidence clearly, and Rebecca Holt's defense fell apart under scrutiny. The alleged boundary adjustment did not exist. The HOA's approval was irrelevant because the HOA did not own my land. Patricia had built her business on property she had no right to use. On cross-examination, David questioned Patricia about the insurance invoices she had sent me. Mrs. Whitmore, why did you send Mr. Rodriguez invoices for insurance related to your daycare business? Because the play structure was on his property, so he had liability exposure. I was trying to protect him. But you did not have his permission to be on his property, correct? I had the HOA's permission. That is not what I asked. Did you have Mr. Rodriguez's permission? She hesitated. No. So you built a commercial structure on his land without asking, then billed him for insurance related to your business. Is that correct? I was operating in good faith based on the HOA's approval. Did you tell him you were building on his property? I assumed he knew. You assumed. Did you send him a letter? An email? Did you knock on his door? No, but it was discussed at HOA meetings, which he did not attend. So you built a $15,000 play structure on his property, operated a commercial business there for months, and never once directly communicated with him about it. Patricia's face was red. The HOA approved it. Move to strike as non-responsive, David said. No further questions. The second day focused on damages and the harassment campaign. David called me to the stand and I recounted every incident: the confrontation in my driveway, the vandalism, the bogus HOA fines, the spray-painted trash cans, the nails in my driveway, the special assessment meeting. I also testified about the emotional toll, the stress of being vilified in my own neighborhood, the anxiety of wondering what would happen next, the feeling of being under siege in my own home. Rebecca Holt tried to paint me as overly sensitive, as someone who had escalated the situation unnecessarily. But David had documented everything meticulously: photos, video footage, copies of every fine and notice, timestamps on everything. It was hard to argue with that evidence. Gerald Whitmore took the stand and tried to defend the HOA's actions, claiming the fines were legitimate and unrelated to the lawsuit. But David walked him through each one, showing how they had started immediately after the lawsuit was filed, how they cited violations that did not actually exist or that other homeowners were not cited for. Mr. Whitmore, how many other homeowners have been fined for having a crooked house number? I would have to check the records. You are the HOA president. You sign off on all fines. How many? I do not recall. Is the answer 0? Gerald shifted in his seat. Possibly. And how many homeowners have been fined for a faded mailbox? I do not have that information in front of me. Because the answer is also 0, is it not? Mr. Rodriguez is the only homeowner who has been subjected to this level of scrutiny, correct? We have to enforce the rules uniformly. But you are not enforcing them uniformly. You are targeting Mr. Rodriguez. Isn't that true? I disagree with that characterization. David let it hang in the air, then moved on. The trial concluded late on the second day. Judge Brennan said he would issue a written ruling within 30 days. Those 30 days were some of the longest of my life. I tried to focus on work, tried to have a normal routine, but I was constantly waiting for the other shoe to drop. The harassment had mostly stopped during the trial, but I did not trust that it was over. On November 2nd, I received an email from David with the subject line, "We won." I opened it with shaking hands. Judge Brennan's ruling was 15 pages long. He found in my favor on every claim. He ruled that the Whitmores had trespassed on my property, that they had no right to bill me for insurance, and that their actions constituted conversion of my property for commercial use. He awarded me $12,000 in damages for the unauthorized use of my land, based on what fair market rent would have been for the time period they operated the daycare there. He also found that the HOA had engaged in a campaign of retaliation against me, and that the fines were pretextual and invalid. He invalidated every fine and ordered the HOA to reimburse me for the time and money I had spent fighting them. He awarded me an additional $8,000 for emotional distress. He also ordered the Whitmores to reimburse me for the $3,000 I had spent removing the play structure. In total, I was awarded $23,000, plus my attorney fees, which were another $18,000. I called David immediately. "This is incredible." "It is a very strong ruling," he agreed. "The judge saw through their nonsense. The question now is whether they appeal." "Can they?" "They can try, but I do not think they will succeed. The factual findings are well supported, and Judge Brennan's legal analysis is sound. An appeal would just cost them more money." I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. It was over. I had won. 2 weeks later, I received a check from the Whitmores' attorney for $23,000. No appeal was filed. David also received his attorney fees. It was really, truly over. But the fallout was not. In December, a group of homeowners organized a recall election to remove Gerald Whitmore as HOA president. The recall passed easily. Gerald resigned from the board entirely, and Patricia closed Sunshine Sprouts Daycare. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that they were putting their house on the market and moving out of state. The new HOA board reached out to me and apologized for how I had been treated. They rescinded all the fines formally and sent me a letter stating that I was in good standing. They also passed new rules requiring any commercial use of common areas to be approved by a majority vote of homeowners, not just the board, and prohibiting board members from personally benefiting from HOA decisions. In January, I attended my first HOA meeting in almost a year. A new president had been elected, a reasonable guy named Tom who worked in banking. The meeting was boring and focused on things like landscaping budgets and pool maintenance schedules. It was exactly what an HOA meeting should be. Afterward, several neighbors came up to me and apologized for believing the Whitmores' version of events. A few said they had suspected something was off but had not wanted to get involved. I appreciated the apologies, though part of me was still bitter about how easily I had been vilified. Janet, my next-door neighbor, brought me cookies as a peace offering. "I feel terrible about how I acted," she said. "Patricia was very convincing. But you were right all along." "Thank you," I said, accepting the cookies. "I appreciate that." Life slowly returned to normal. The vandalism stopped. The harassment stopped. I could park in my driveway without worrying about nails, could walk to my mailbox without wondering what fresh nonsense waited for me there. In February, I noticed that the Whitmores' house had a sold sign in front. They were gone within a month. I never saw them again. I thought about selling my own house and moving somewhere without an HOA, but ultimately decided against it. I liked my home. I liked the neighborhood now that the toxic element was gone, and I was not going to let the Whitmores drive me out. In March, exactly 1 year after this whole mess started, I was working in my home office when I heard a knock at the door. I opened it to find Tom, the HOA president, standing there with another man I did not recognize. "Hey, Keith, sorry to bother you," Tom said. "This is Craig Mendoza. He's a landscape architect. The board is looking at developing that common area behind your house and a few others, and we wanted to get your input since you actually own part of it." I smiled. "What did you have in mind?" "Just a walking path and some benches, native landscaping, something the whole community can enjoy. We would need an easement from you and a couple other homeowners who own portions of that land, but we would pay fair market value for the easement rights." "I would be open to that," I said, "as long as it is all done properly, with actual documentation and agreements." "Absolutely. We learned our lesson from the last situation." We talked for a while about the plans, and I agreed to meet with Craig to review the details. It felt good to be treated with respect, to have my property rights acknowledged rather than trampled. A few weeks later, I signed an easement agreement that gave the HOA the right to build and maintain a walking path across a portion of my land. They paid me $1,500 for the easement, which was fair. The path was built in April, and it actually looked nice. I found myself using it in the evenings, walking the loop through the desert and watching the sun set over the mountains. One evening in May, I ran into Janet on the path. She was walking her dog, a little terrier that yapped at me until she shushed him. "Beautiful evening," she said. "It is." "I'm glad you did not move away," she said. "A lot of people would have after everything you went through." I shrugged. "This is my home. I was not going to let them take that from me." She nodded. "For what it is worth, I think you handled it all with a lot of grace. I would have lost my mind." I almost did a few times. We walked together for a bit, talking about nothing important, and it felt normal. Like I was just another neighbor, not the guy who had been at war with the HOA. That is what I wanted. Normalcy. Peace. The ability to live in my house without drama or conflict. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned a few things. I learned that HOAs can be weaponized by bad actors, that rules and regulations can be twisted to serve personal agendas. I learned that standing up for your rights can be exhausting and expensive and lonely, but sometimes it is necessary. I learned that documentation is everything, that you should trust your instincts when something does not feel right, and that not everyone will believe you even when you are clearly in the right. I also learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can work. It took time and money and stress, but in the end, the truth came out, and justice was served. Judge Brennan saw through the Whitmores' lies and held them accountable. That mattered. The money I was awarded helped, certainly. I used some of it to upgrade my security system, some to take a much-needed vacation, and I put the rest in savings. But the real victory was not financial. It was knowing that I had stood up for myself, that I had not backed down when it would have been easier to just let them have their way, and that in the end, I had won. The Whitmores had tried to use my property for their own benefit without asking, had tried to bully me into compliance when I objected, and had weaponized the HOA and community sentiment against me when I fought back. But they had failed. Their business was gone, their reputation was destroyed, and they had been forced to leave the neighborhood in disgrace. I did not take pleasure in their downfall, exactly. I would have preferred that none of it had happened, that they had just asked permission in the first place or chosen a different location for their play structure. But they had made their choices, and they had faced the consequences. As for me, I continued living my quiet life. I worked from home, I took walks in the evenings, I attended the occasional HOA meeting to make sure the new board was staying on track. I never forgot what had happened, but I did not dwell on it either. One afternoon in late summer, I was sitting on my back patio with a beer, enjoying the dry heat and watching a roadrunner hunt for lizards in the desert beyond my wall. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Thought you would want to know. The Arizona Department of Health Services opened an investigation into Sunshine Sprouts Daycare. Apparently, other complaints came in after your case. Patricia Whitmore's childcare license has been revoked." I read the message twice, then set my phone down. I felt a grim satisfaction. The system had worked, slowly but surely. The Whitmores had not just lost their battle with me. They had lost everything they had tried to build on the foundation of lies and entitlement. I took a sip of my beer and watched the roadrunner dart across the sand. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was peaceful. It was home. And it was mine, free and clear, with no one trying to take it from me anymore. That was enough.